The late evening air was heavy with the scent of rain. Outside, the sky had turned an ominous shade of purple, promising a storm. Inside the small-town grocery store, the warm yellow lighting gave a sense of safety, at least to most of the customers. Mark Reynolds, a 34-year-old single dad, pushed a shopping cart down aisle 4, trying to juggle a mental list of essentials while keeping an eye on his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. She was skipping beside him, her little fingers tracing the colorful cereal boxes. "Daddy, can we get the rainbow loops this time? Please?" she asked, her big brown eyes widening in a way that made Mark's heart melt every single time. He smiled. "All right, but only if you promise to eat your vegetables this week." "I promise," she said solemnly, though they both knew her promises about vegetables had a short lifespan. They eventually reached the checkout line, where a young cashier, no more than 22, was ringing up a customer. She was petite, with hair tucked neatly under a black cap, but what caught Mark's attention wasn't her appearance. It was the way her hands trembled as she scanned each item. At first, he thought it might be nerves. The customer ahead was paying in coins, and the line was long, maybe she was just stressed. But when it was their turn, and she reached for the box of rainbow loops Sophie had placed on the counter, Mark noticed her hands weren't just trembling, they were shaking violently. "Evening," he said politely, placing the rest of their groceries on the conveyor belt. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft but tense. She kept her gaze down, as if avoiding eye contact on purpose. Mark placed the milk next to the bread and tried to give her a reassuring smile. "Long day?" he asked, making casual conversation. "Something like that," she said quickly. Sophie, oblivious to the tension, was humming to herself and pretending the conveyor belt was a racetrack. As the cashier reached for the gallon of milk, Mark couldn't ignore it anymore. The tremors in her hands seemed almost uncontrollable. He watched her struggle to scan the barcode, the milk slipping slightly before she caught it. "Are you all right?" Mark asked, his voice dropping into genuine concern. The young woman froze for a split second, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the milk. "I'm fine," she said in a voice that didn't sound fine at all. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered toward the store's front door for a fraction of a second, quick, almost imperceptible. If Mark hadn't been paying attention, he would have missed it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the glass doors as another customer walked in. The cashier's hands shook harder. Mark leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "You're not fine. What's going on?" She hesitated, scanning the bread with a soft beep. Then, as if making a decision, she whispered something so low he almost didn't hear it. "He's here." Mark's brows furrowed. "Who?" Her eyes darted toward a man standing near the magazine rack by the entrance. He was tall, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up despite being indoors. His face was partially shadowed, but his eyes, sharp and unblinking, were fixed directly on the cashier. Mark's chest tightened. Something was wrong. The cashier continued scanning, her voice shaking now. I can't call the police," he said. "If I did," she trailed off, biting her lip so hard it turned white. Mark glanced again at the man. He wasn't browsing magazines, his hands were in his pockets, and he hadn't moved since entering. His posture was too still, too deliberate. "Is he following you?" Mark asked quietly, keeping his tone calm for Sophie's sake. The cashier swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "He's been here every night for the past week. Always at the same time. I don't know what he wants, but..." Her voice cracked. She didn't finish. Mark's instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had helped him protect Sophie after his wife passed away. His pulse quickened, but he knew he had to think, not panic. He glanced at Sophie, who was still blissfully unaware, playing with a packet of gum on the counter. The last thing he wanted was to frighten her. "Okay, Mark said slowly. Listen to me. You're not alone right now. The cashier blinked, clearly surprised by his firmness. What's your name? He asked. Emma. Emma, I'm Mark. And that's Sophie. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Whatever's going on, we'll figure this out. Just finish ringing us up. Act normal. Emma's breath was shaky as she scanned the last items. But then, Mark noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man in the hoodie had moved closer to the checkout area. Not by much, but enough to make it clear he wasn't just waiting for someone. He was watching Emma's every move, and now, his eyes had flicked briefly toward Sophie. Mark's grip on the shopping cart tightened. When Emma handed him the receipt, her fingers brushed against his hand, and he felt the slightest pressure, like she was passing something. He looked down. It was a folded slip of paper. He pretended to put it in his pocket without reading it, but his heart was pounding. Thanks, he said casually. Have a good night. Emma didn't respond. She just gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod before turning to the next customer. Mark began pushing the cart toward the exit, Sophie skipping along. As they passed the man in the hoodie, Mark caught a whiff of cigarette smoke and noticed the faint outline of something metallic in the man's pocket. Once outside, Mark unfolded the paper in his pocket. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were just 3 words. Please help me. The rain had started to fall, soft at first but quickly turning into a downpour. Mark stood under the awning, staring back through the glass at Emma. Her hands were still shaking. The man in the hoodie had stepped out of line and was now leaning against the wall inside, still watching her. Mark's mind raced. He could call the police, but if Emma was right, if the man would retaliate, he couldn't just leave her to handle this alone. He turned to Sophie, who was tugging at his sleeve. Daddy, are we going home? He forced a smile. Not yet, sweetheart. Daddy has to help someone first. Lightning flashed across the sky. Mark took a deep breath, looked back at the man in the hoodie, and made a decision that would change all their lives forever.